To begin opening up the top tray housing, we first need to remove the handle. In order to remove the handle, we flip the joystick over and you'll see there are 4 holes here. Those are to be able to access 4 screws with a Allen wrench. So you want to loosen those 4 screws first. And this is a 2.5 millimeter hex wrench that I'm using. This should work for all of the M3 screws on this joystick. So once all 4 screws are loose, the handle will be quite loose, and there's a cable here. Just be careful not to tug too hard on it. There's a little strain relief, but so then we want to take the cable cover door off, and there is one M2.5 screw, so you're going to need a 2 millimeter hex wrench to undo that one. And the cover door should just slide backwards and come off. Inside here, there's a piece of plastic which is holding down the cable. In this particular case, there's only 1 screw holding it down. But on yours, there will be possibly 2 screws, 1 on either side. So go ahead and unscrew those. Now the plastic piece should come off, and the cable should just slide back out of the connector. So just pull it straight out of that connector and go ahead and set the handle aside. To get into the top housing, now there's just 6 screws, 6 M3 screws, so just go ahead and loosen those up. The 2 in the middle are a lot longer than the 4 on the outside, as you can see. And then the tray cover, oops, I missed one. And then the tray cover should just come right off. So now you have access to the load cells. The only worry with opening this up and putting this back together is you don't want these cables to get pinched. On this particular one, they've been zip tied, but it is exceptionally difficult to operate that zip tie. So on most joysticks, it has not been zip tied. We're hoping on future joysticks it becomes a lot easier. If it worries you, you could tack it down with a little hot glue, or you could go through the trouble of putting a zip tie there. But for the most part, we just move these cables off to the side and around the corner, and it closes up just fine. So what we're inside here to do is to replace 2, or I should say, we're here to replace 1 spring. So whichever spring that is, it doesn't matter. You always have to replace 2 at the same time. Just because of how it's assembled, it's just not possible to do it any other way. So let's say this is the spring that we want to replace. What you have to do is choose to also replace either this one or to also replace this one at the same time. And I'll show you why in just a second. So the springs are held in place by set screws driven into the side of the load cells. So I'm just going to start by just loosening this one. So you'd think that this spring would be loose now, except what has happened is the ferrule, which is The ferrule, which is on the end of the spring, is made of aluminum, and we found that it gets cold welded to the inside of the load cell. That'll be steel in the future instead of aluminum. And that's what makes this process a little bit frustrating right now. So to get the other side loose, we're going to have to open up the bottom housing, and this is 6 screws at these 6 corners here. So again, just the 2.5 millimeter hex to do this. And once those 6 screws are out, this just slides off. Now, one difference, you'll notice this has the paper, the little acrylic button has the paper taken off the sides. We usually left it on just to keep the acrylic protected. It doesn't actually affect the clarity or the image of the LED coming through. So just don't lose this acrylic piece. This is white on this particular joystick. This is a prototype, by the way. That's why so many things are a little bit different. This is white on this joystick, but it'll be black on yours. It's the USB strain relief. So now we come over to the spring that we're trying to replace. You'll see there is another set screw that we're going to loosen up. For the yaw, yeah, it's so close we might as well just remove it. Let's just remove the set screw for now. All right, so again, the ferrule has been cold welded, so these do not come apart. Additionally, this is a 4-pointed affair, so even if we could get it apart, this would not be able to spread apart enough to extract the spring. So on this particular case, I'm going to select that we're going to replace this spring as well. And that will, once we've got everything out, we'll be able to kind of fold this open. Don't want to fold too far because we don't want to do too much damage to these screws over here, or these springs over here. But yeah, we need to do 2 at the same time. So I'm going to loosen this, and I'm going to loosen this. So now I've loosened both springs on one side. Again, you could either loosen these 2 or these 2 to replace this screw or this spring. So if you just pulled these apart, it's not going to come. It's not going to come apart. So what we need to do is actually destroy these 2 springs in order to, or rather break them to disconnect them. So grab a pliers. Reach inside here and cut that spring, and I'm going to reach inside this one and cut that spring. So now you can see this very easily comes apart. So I'm going to shorten this up just a little bit more, and this one as well. So you can see I've shortened up these 2 springs a little bit. Now we take the anvil and place it up inside, and it should go all the way up to the top. Before doing anything else, just take the base, the metal base, and put this whole assembly just kind of loose on top of that so that we're directing forces directly through the anvil. Now take the pin tool that we've made you, might look a little bit like this, might look a little different. Place it directly on top of the spring that you're trying to extract. And give it a tap. There we go. So what the anvil's done is essentially made sure that we can direct forces from the load cell directly through metal. so we're not impacting on the resin at all. And now we'll do it for the other side to extract the other spring. I'll just give you a close-up of what this looks like here. You can see the anvil is around the spring inside there. There we go. And now all of the springs on this side are extracted from the top. Now we need to extract the springs from the bottom as well. Alright, so now that we've got the springs out of the upper load cells, we're going to take the extra spring out of the lower load cell. And to do that, we're going to take this little anvil that we made that slides in between this plate and the load cell. So now we need to put something very resilient underneath this top plate so that we can hammer the spring through there. My table is not thin enough to fit underneath this, so I'm just going to be sort of putting it at an angle against this edge. It's kind of supporting it here. So take your pin and your hammer and go ahead and extract the spring. Now we'll come around and do the other spring. So now we should have all of the spring extracted from all of the load cells. And now we can flip this back over and put the new springs in. So now that I got this flipped back over, we're going to put the new springs in. I've just got the base here just so I have something to rest this on. But start by putting the one end of the spring into the lower load cell, and it should just barely be kind of at the, like, flush with the lower side of this load cell. And go ahead and tighten that set screw. And then take your other spring and do the same thing, just put it down until it is flush with the bottom of this load cell down here. You might need to clean up the spring or tap it a little bit to make it fit. Once you've got that spring there in the lower load cell, then you can tighten it up with the set screw. So now we can rest this on the lower base and get the springs fit into the upper load cells. So you have to align both of them at the same time before it'll go down. But it's the same deal. You can give it a couple of taps right on top of the load cells until these springs are flush with the tops of the load cells. And then you can tighten the set screws. So now that we have all of the springs installed, all we are doing at this point is just closing all the housings back up and putting the handle back on. So we're going to do the reverse of what we did to take it apart. So the first thing you want to do is reinstall the acrylic button, and that goes on just like that and slides into the the base. And go ahead and flip that on its side and use the 25mm M3 screws in those 6 holes to attach the base housing on. Next, you want to install the tray cover. So before you do this, make sure that these wires coming up the sides of these channels are definitely not along any of these edges of resin. So when the, let me turn this up a little bit. So when the tray cover comes down on top of it, it doesn't pinch any of those wires. And again, the longer 20mm screws go on these middle holes, and the shorter ones go in the close and far holes. So next we want to install the plastic strain relief for the handle cable. So start by taking the bottom section, which looks like this, and placing it down on top of the PCB. Next you want to take the handle cable and plug it in to its connector. Down inside there. And then take the top of the strain relief, rest it on top of that, push it down on top of the cable, and take the 10mm M3 screws and screw down the strain relief. Once you have the strain relief screwed down, go ahead and take the cable cover door and slide it into place. Take the 2.5mm, or I should say M2.5 screw and your 2mm hex and screw the cover door down. And now we want to screw down the handle. So when you're screwing down the handle, just make sure that you push this cable forwards so that when I put this down, if you look inside there, it's coming right through that, come on, give me some light, right through that slot, and that it's not getting pinched between these two pieces of plastic here. So flip this on its side and screw those 4 screws from the very beginning to tighten the handle on. And that's it. Everything should be back together, and it should all work now with the new springs.